Welcome back, everybody. I hope everyone enjoyed a fantastic lunch break there and that we all got up and stretched a little bit. This afternoon, we are kicking off with how to write and publish scientific research. Dr. Strike is a professor at the Dalalana School of Public Health. I hope I said that right. University of Toronto, scientist at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute, and the president of the Canadian Association of HIV Research. Her research program aims to improve health services for people who use drugs and other marginalized populations.
Thanks for the introduction, Riley. I'm glad to be here this afternoon. This afternoon where I am. And I look forward to answering any questions or clearing up things as we go along. Just one thing, I'm the past president now, so I forgot to update my bio. So I'm going to share my screen. And so today I'm going to talk about writing and publishing scientific research with I don't know. I'll come back. Can you see or just see part of the screen? Oh, there we go. There we go. Writing and publishing scientific research. So I'm going to focus mostly on journal articles. I just want to talk a little bit start with talking about me as a writer, which will make sense kind of by the end. I find that, so now I've been an academic for just over 12 years. Before that, I was a scientist at a hospital for 10 years, and then I was a PhD student and backwards, right? And I've always found writing to be a challenge. I struggle with it. As the slide says, I'm a procrastinator and avoider. And I'm not alone. When I talk to a lot of my colleagues, they say the same. And to get over that, I've completed courses, I've done workshops, I've read books, I've sought help and the like. And so that's just part of part of me as an academic. I struggle with writing. Despite that, I have 175 peer-reviewed scientific articles. I'm either, of varying positions in the author order, and I'll tell you a little bit more why I note that there's 110 of those came since 2010, and why that's important. I also have written quite a lot of reports, gray literature, best practice guidelines. If you're into harm reduction, we released the best practice guidelines for harm reduction, the distribution of harm reduction supplies. You can find it on CAHR, so just a little promo there. But I write stuff like that. And most recently, we converted one of our sets of findings into a comic book. And that's about using the internet to supervise consumption of drug use. So you can also find that through Kaput and also Katie, the comic book. So there's different ways of writing. And even though I struggle with writing, I have managed to, over time, become a productive writer. So for many of you, I'm not quite sure, can I see, Riley, can I see the chat? Like, can the attendees put something in the chat for me? Do you know?
You should be able to see the chat. I can post a note right now for you.
Okay, so I just wondered if those who are attending this, I can see your chat, but I wonder if those attending the session can tell me, like, what stage of your career are you at? Are you a master's student? Are you a postdoc? Are you a new clinician scientist? Are you a PhD student? Just so I have a sense of who's out there. Postdoc, MSc, twilight zone of PhD. Yes, I've been there too. PhD candidate, great. About to start a master's. Okay, transferred from PhD. Okay, great. So a range of master's student stage of publishing, completed postmasters, working in the industry. Hi, Stephen. I'm wondering what your last name is and if I taught you. Anyway, if I did teach you, I'm glad to see you on the chat. Anyway, so great. So thanks for finished MSc. So thanks for putting your answers in the chat box. So what I'm going to talk about today will apply to all of you, right? As new investigators about why to publish? Like, why do we, struggle through, or some of you probably don't struggle as writers, but why do we publish? And then I'll get into some of the things that that you have to do to publish in a scientific journal, like how to select the type of article you want to write, how to select a journal, how to develop a writing habit, how to respond to reviewers, rejection, and other fun things. Oh, and I forgot to, I'm not going to talk about gray literature. I cut that out just for time's sake. So the content is based on literature about writing, my own experiences, and some of those of my colleagues, as we've shared moments of struggle and jubilation when we get an article accepted into a journal Today, one of my doctoral students got to revise and resubmit, so we're very pleased about that. So she has some work to do, but she will move forward. So why do we publish? Well, there's lots of reasons to publish, and I've divided them into three. We publish to survive, depending on your career stage. Publishing is really important for survival or progression to the next stage. So if you're a master's student and you're interested in a doctoral program, you might want to publish something to put in your application. For PhD students, if you're interested in academic work or research center work, you want to publish to build up your CV. And if you're a new, like an investigator in an independent program, you're writing to survive in your field. Like if you're a junior academic, you're writing to progress through the ranks of the academy. As the slide says, articles are often considered to be the currency of the realm. And there's a lot of counting done on CVs to see how many you have and where you've published. And you've probably all heard the term publish or perish. So publishing is very important. Publishing is, oh, sorry, I just looked at another message. So Community Leadership and Institute. Oh, thanks for joining us, this afternoon, Chantel. Publishing is important for tenure and promotion. So I just became an associate dean, and one of my responsibilities is helping faculty members survive through the tenure and promotion process. And so that will require a lot of talking about publishing and keeping up with the numbers, but also the quality. It's not just about numbers, it's also about the quality and your message and trying to produce the highest quality you can from from your research. So that's about survival, right? It sounds kind of like, oh God, why would I bother? It just seems so awful just to survive. It's also to thrive, right? We're all here because we have a sense of curiosity. You don't go through, graduate school and beyond without some sense of curiosity about the field. And you also don't work in community organizations in research if you don't have a curious mind, right? So publishing helps you to thrive and use what you know and try to be driven by your sense of curiosity. It also helps you improve your chances for promotion, as I was talking about earlier. And it also can create new opportunities for you to thrive. You can, through writing up your work, either through journal articles or, great literature, you can, be identified for other kinds of opportunities that throughout your career might become salient and of interest, right? When, you're looking for something new to do because you're a bit bored, right? Like over time it happens. So I'm an associate dean, partly because I got a little bit bored doing the same thing all the time, even though I love teaching, right? I love teaching, I love doing research, but I need a new challenge. So you might become an editor or chair based on your writing, right? You might, also create new collaborations. So I'm trying to develop a collaboration with a group at Manchester to look at drug policy, right? And it's made possible in part because of what I've published, right? Because people can see what I have to say about different things. And very importantly, and I think for HIV researchers and for researchers of all kinds, but I think in particular, because I am an HIV researcher and a harm reduction researcher, we publish to have impact, right? We want to make sure that what we learn through our research, what we learn from people in the community, or what we learn in our labs is useful to somebody else. It's not only useful to us, it's useful to push the field forward. And the field could be anything from, therapeutic products to community interventions. It could be to better understand, population health or social determinants of health indicators for populations to identify areas where we need to do more work. You can also publish to have advanced knowledge, not just, to have an impact, but to advance the field of science, right? Which will also satisfy some of your curiosity, right? Of trying to push the field forward. And you might want to have impact and publish, you can also use what you write to establish yourself as a credible, respected expert and scholar, which helps you, if you're interested in policy, to address policy issues or to become a scholar of policy or an expert witness or someone who works with the WHO as a scientific expert or whatever kind of organization. But publishing is important. One of my very early mentors when I first started my PhD. Her name is Laurie Ferris. She talked to me about how failure to publish was unethical. And I often thought that was a really, like it was an overly strong statement. But over the years, I've come to, have a more nuanced understanding of that. And what her point was that we apply for money, people review our stuff, they review our articles, people talk to us, or they give us their blood or their other fluids. Or we have access to different kinds of materials, and a lot of that is funded through public funds. Some of it comes from industry, but nonetheless, failure to publish means that we haven't fully lived up to the expectations of using public funds. So publishing is important because that the Canadian public, for a lot of us, provide tax dollars, and they want good money, good value for their money. So it's important to publish to make sure that you live up to the expectations of the ultimate funder, the Canadian public, who wants us to produce knowledge that's of use to it. I'm having a bit of oh, there we go. Writing is essential to research, right? As I said, it can be a struggle, but you really can't do research without writing. And because your goal is to produce something, right, that somebody else can benefit from. And as I say at the end of the slide, it's a skill that is learned and improved over time. So my skills as a writer, an academic writer, started when I was undergrad student. I worked for Statistics Canada during a work term, and I worked for one of their journals, and the editors there helped me to develop my skill as an academic writer. And I still, as I said earlier, continue to learn how to be a more effective writer. And it's something that, if you're struggling now, you may continue to struggle, but you have to be kind of zen about it and just push through it and keep trying, because it's really important for your career. So when you're trying to figure out where to publish, you also want to think about what type of article. So you may think of a journal article as something that looks like this. It looks like intro, methods, results, discussion, or conclusions, But there are lots of different types of articles that you can write. And you can look in journals to see what types of articles that they accept. So that's often in a section called, something for authors, author guidelines or the like. And so on the left, there's the American Journal of Public Health that lists all the different kinds of articles you can write. You can write a standard research article, intro, methods, results, conclusion, or you can write brief articles, systematic reviews, letters and responses, commentaries, analytic essays, and the like. Public health practice, I've written a couple of those for the American Journal of Public Health. It takes a different, we did that for a program at Casey House, so we wanted to write about the research we did, but also to describe their program. And that's the BMJ on the right, and it has, similar, but also some different kinds of articles. And you might think about, like, what is it I want to say, and does it what kind of style does it fit in? And you see at the bottom, it says it has a Christmas issue, and it does. Kind of a curiosity that BMJ does, has sort of funny articles that they write at the end of the year. So you might want to start by thinking, okay, so do I want to write a standard article, or do I have an opinion I want to share, or the like, and find the structure for that kind of article that you want to write. And then you want to create a list of potential journals that you might want to consider submitting to. So how do you figure out the list of journals, or where you might want to publish? So my doctoral students ask me this all the time, and I used to ask my doctoral supervisor as well. So what I do, and what I suggest to them, is you check through the reference list of the articles that you're reading for your manuscript. You almost always, I can't imagine an article that doesn't have a reference list. So you've done some background reading. Where do those articles come from? Pay attention to where they came from, and look through their reference lists as well, to see, like, where do articles that cover the types of topics that you're going to, or the topic that you're going to cover, where do they tend to be published? You can ask your mentors where they publish and why. You can also look for special calls or be invited to publish. Sometimes there are special calls for a particular topic, and you write to that special call. Sometimes you're invited as part of a conference, or you're invited because you're known in the field to submit to a special issue. And it's a good thing if you get invited to say yes if you have relevant material, because you have a higher chance of success when you get invited to submit to a journal. You create and then you create a potential list of journals. So I have on my cloud a list of all the journals. So every time we have this discussion, with some of our research, where are we going to publish? We look through, we want an HIV journal, we want a harm reduction, we want an addiction journal, we want a community-based research journal, and then we have a whole list. So I keep that list and I refresh it. There's also tools available through a variety of publishers. So that's Elsevier. One thing to know about the tools, and there's the next one is Springer, is they push you towards their journals. So they're very helpful, but you have to know that they're not going to tell you about journals outside of their company. Then you want, when you have your list, analyze the appropriateness of the journal for what it is you want to write. So does your article fit within the scope of the journal? And each journal will tell you about its scope. If you look online, they all have a section about the aims and scope. You also want to think about, who does that journal reach, right? And does that journal reach your target audience? You also might, when you think about reach, you might want to think about open access versus not open access. So if you want to reach anybody who has an interest, you're going to want to find an open access journal, which means anybody can access it. They don't need a subscription, either of their own or through their institution. As I said in the previous slide, you want to think about, does that journal take the kind of article that you want to write? Or do they have a type of article that you can fit your idea into if you really like that journal for any of the previous reasons? You also want to think about the reputation of the journal. We always say start as high as possible, the best quality journal, because they all take different kinds of articles, and you can look at impact factors to see which ones are the more prestigious, and start high. And I'll talk to you about rejection later on, but it's important to start high and with the most respected journal that you think you can get your work into. And once you've done sort of your analysis of all the potential journals, you probably want to keep a list for that particular article that you're going to write of, maybe 3 or 4 journals that you might want to submit to. So why wouldn't you just pick one and move on? Anybody want to tell me about that in the chat? Why wouldn't you just pick one journal and move on with writing and then submitting? Rejection. Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that? So I'll talk in a few minutes about rejection, but that's the point. So sometimes you're really lucky when you submit. Oh yeah, and your manuscript might evolve. That's also a good point. Sometimes it gets accepted the first place it goes, and sometimes it doesn't. So you don't want to have to do your homework again about all the journals. Doesn't the writing have to be specific to a journal's format? Yeah, I'll talk about format in a minute, Jill. And best to have a game plan if your paper is rejected? Yes, you're prepared, right? So that's the reason why you want to do your analysis and have in mind, 3 or 4 journals to see where you're to find a home eventually for your article. Okay, so who puts writing in their schedule? And how often? Just be honest. Have you ever written writing or dissertation or something like that in your schedule? I pretend to put it in my schedule. Well, that's pretty honest. I try to, but hard to schedule. Okay. No, Charity says no and covers their eyes. I have to write often. Okay. Yeah. Never schedule it formally, just motivated by deadlines. Yeah, I think that's very true. Writing workshops can be helpful. It's in there, fulfilled in my dreams. That's a very good point. Yes, I sometimes put it in and think, oh, I'm going to do that, and I don't. So let's talk about that. So I do when there's a deadline for a submission. Okay, great. So some variation there in how people do that. So if you think about how successful academics, and also you could cross that out and put researchers of all kinds, right? When I read books about that, I learn that some successful academics write dailies, others sporadically, some at home, others at work, some on trains, airplanes. I've never been able to write on a plane. I see people doing it, and I think, how do they manage to stay focused and not watch the entertainment system instead? Some work on a word processor, some still write by hand, increasingly not. That makes me very old. I used to write by hand. I don't anymore. Some map out detailed outlines before they start writing. Others write to discover what they have to say. So there's no one way to write, but you have to find your approach, your method, your skill in writing. And part of that is to develop your habit of writing that helps you be successful. So that what you have in mind as writing goals, you can fulfill and not sort of always feel you're behind the 8 ball. And it takes time. So a lot of this came from Silva, which I think his book is called How to Write a Lot, which is a very skinny little book. And I've read it so many times, and I recommend it to people. I'm just looking around my office to see. I think it's at my home. I still haven't transitioned back to my formal office from my home. Anyway, it's a great book. So are some of the others. And he says, and so do others, that if you put writing in your schedule and you stick to it, you're more likely to write and to achieve your goals and to get things done on time. You need to think about how much time you have and how much time you want to have to devote to writing. So, 20 years ago, when I first finished my PhD, I spent a lot of time devoted to writing because that was really important for my career. And now I spend less time devoted to writing, partly because I have staff that do a lot of the writing and I have students that do a lot of the writing. So my role has changed, right? And your writing will change over time with your own career. So you need to think about how much time you want and have to devote. And sometimes I put in lots of time when I'm writing proposals and the like, because I still do a lot of that. And as I said, so you want to think about scheduling it depending on your stage of career. And it's really important to protect your writing time. So I have a colleague who she writes on Fridays, and there is no way she is ever going to talk to me on a Friday. And she's not going to make any appointments with anybody else. She is devoted to her Friday writing day, and that works for her. That doesn't work so well for me. I used to have a writing day, but anyway, I like to mix it up a little bit more, but that works for her. And maybe that would work for you. You need to find your habit that works. If you lose time because that happens, right? Things come up, and God knows during the pandemic, sometimes our schedules were all over the place, right? If it's important to reschedule time that you've lost. So maybe you had to go to a meeting you didn't expect. Maybe your pet got sick, maybe your kid got sick, maybe you got sick or whatever. It's important to put that time back into your schedule if you didn't achieve, if you didn't write during that time, because otherwise you're always behind the eight ball. You can experiment with different writing schedules, length of time, time of day, location, or whatever. One of the writers, I think it was Johnson and Mullen, can't remember, said write at a time that feels wrong, because it could be that you have in your head that you may think to yourself, I'm a late night writer, but actually it could be that you're actually a morning writer if you give it a try. So, so mix it up until you find something that works for you. Oops, sorry. Silva talks about specious barriers, and those run like this. I hear them, I say them, I have said them. I just don't have time. I need to find more time. I need more time to write. My colleagues say that to me too. I just need more time to write. I need to do more analyses. Oh, I can't possibly start because I need to do more analyses, right? I need a better computer. Oh, my printer isn't working. I need to read more. I need to read more about, some of the, seminal articles before I can write my article. I need to feel inspired to write. I can't until I'm stuck. Some of you probably heard those. Some of you have probably said those. And Silva says that those are specious barriers that you need to overcome. So maybe you do need a better computer, but you probably the computer you have, unless you're like Andrew who dumped a cup of coffee on his recently, your computer's probably fine for now to fulfill your 2-hour writing period. And you don't always need to feel inspired. I've often said that I need to feel inspired. I don't have an idea. And I once said that to a man called Jay Brown. He used to be the head of the AIDS Bureau in Ontario, lovely man. And I said to him, oh, I just can't finish my dissertation. I'm not inspired, and he said to me, you know what, Carol? And a Texas drawl to him. He said, Carol, what you need to do is tomorrow go and sit at your desk for 2 hours and don't get up. And keep doing that until you start writing. And he was really right. And that's how I finished my dissertation. Eventually, I started, writing for like 7 or 8 hours a day. Writing meaning like editing and all that kind of stuff. And I finished writing my whole dissertation in about 8 weeks. All because Jay told me, just go sit at your desk, Carol, and stop, talking about how you can't, right? Because you need to do. So I offered that advice to you if you have some specious barriers preventing you from moving forward. So now you figured out, I'm going to write a commentary, or I'm going to write a standard scientific manuscript. I have a list of potential journals, and I'm now ready to write. So where do you start? You might think, oh, I'm going to start with the title. Don't start with the title. The title is probably the very last thing you write after everything else is written, because as you write, so I'm mostly a qualitative researcher now. I used to only do epidemiological research. But regardless of whether you're qualitative or quantitative, or you write from labs or a community, when you write an article, it changes over time. You have this idea, even with experimental, sometimes, your idea changes about what the focus is. So you want to wait until you've finished writing your article to figure out what your title is going to be. I think you should start with the methods and the results, and then focus on introduction, discussion, and conclusion. And the last thing you write is the abstract and then the title. So I'll go through each of those. So for the methods section, it really depends on your discipline, how big or small your method section is. It can be anywhere from 2 to 10 paragraphs. It depends on if you have an experiment, or if you're a qualitative researcher, if you include a very elaborate theory section, or like the framework that goes with it, or not. So it's disciplinary specific, and it's also determined in part by the journal. So you need to look carefully to see what it is, that journal that you picked, the structure that they're looking for. You also want to look to see if the journal has subheadings that you need to follow exactly. You want to in your method section convey enough information that the rigor of your research is apparent to the reader, right? And also that there's enough detail that a reader could reproduce what you have done, because that's part of the scientific exercise of being able to reproduce what we do, so we can build up knowledge over time. You want to address any ethical issues that are relevant to your study, and you want to make sure you provide citations for all methods, approaches, tools, and analytic procedures. So what I do and what my team does is we overwrite the method sections in our proposals. So that might be your master's thesis proposal, or your dissertation, or it could be your CBR proposal. We overwrite them after we finished all our data collection, or sometimes as we're doing it if we have a multi-year study. And we keep track of all the nitty-gritty little details that you won't remember a year from now, because it may be relevant later on. So we overwrite them, and then at the end, we have this very detailed description of what we did, right? And we then use that and we condense it for the journal articles. And it's very helpful to do that. And I've been doing it for 20 years, and I continue to do it, and I recommend it to you. Okay. The results section of a journal article also varies in length, also depends on what it is you're writing about. I say 2 paragraphs, but I've seen some journal articles that have 1 paragraph. I've seen, some that have, 25 paragraphs worth of materials, but generally they're somewhere between 2 and 10 paragraphs of results. You must follow the conventions of your discipline, like what's the kind of structure, the narrative structure of your article that your discipline follows. Is it observational versus experimental? Most journal articles, if it involves human subjects, the first paragraph is often about who's in your study. It's different. I can't speak to experimental. I've never done that, meaning lab-based with not humans. So anyway, if someone's who does that kind of research is here, maybe you can put in the chat what that first paragraph looks like. Remember that you don't have to write every possible finding from your study, right? So you have to think about tailoring your results section to your key message. One thing to be careful of is not to omit findings that disprove your results. That's considered academic or scientific fraud. So if you have findings that show something different than what it is the story you're trying to tell, you need to show those findings, right? And you need to incorporate those findings into your story, right? And I use story in a very broad sense. Despite that, you also need to be parsimonious with your findings. So you don't need to report everything, don't omit things that are important, but you want to focus on results that relate to your manuscript and the research question addressed in your manuscript. And anything that doesn't fit within that, you need to get rid of, right? Because it's not relevant. And you want a very tight-knit results section that answers your research question as stated in the introduction of your manuscript, which I'm going to come to. You want to describe your findings in a logical sequence, often from participants to descriptive findings to more sophisticated analyses. Slightly different for qualitative research, but follows somewhat of a similar sequence. You use tables where you can, and make sure you don't duplicate fully in the text, because no one needs to read, written out the percentage of participants in each subcategory of this and that. If you can look in the table, you can refer the reader, to the tables. So now you have your methods section written, you've got your results. Now you want to think, okay, this is kind of what I found. How do I frame that for my audience, right? Some of the books that I've read about writing articles say that the introduction is the most completely read, not skimmed for content. I don't really know if that's true. I've read that quite a few times, partly because a lot of our articles start the same way. So I'm writing a lot about the opioid crisis these days, and all the articles start the same way. Nevertheless, so I skim that, right? I just look, oh, that's different or not. And I start looking for new content. Nevertheless, the introduction is really important. You want to have your first couple of paragraphs that provide an overview of the problem, the theory, the question. Like, why is this article important? Like, why should someone keep reading? You want to describe the existing research or theories, identify gaps or controversies, and how your article fits within, or your manuscript fits within the extant literature is going to address a gap. And then you want to end that introduction by stating your hypotheses, your research questions, and or your purpose, right? So where are you taking the reader, and what can they expect to learn from continuing on? After you've done that, then you want to think, okay, now I have to tell the reader, what do you do with this knowledge that I've generated in my results section? You want to very briefly describe or summarize your findings that are in the results. Don't like restate all your findings in the discussion. That's not what the discussion is for. You want to highlight what's new and important from your work. So I found this result, people who are non-binary are more likely to experience joy, whatever, right? And you might say, that is the first finding of its kind. And it compares with what, so-and-so said 10 years ago, and our finding disputes that. Interesting, right? You want to say, this is what's interesting about my work and how it compares with what other people have found. You might say, we found this and nobody else has considered it in that way. It's a new way of analyzing. It's a new way of understanding. We have applied a new kind of typology. And this is what we learned from this typology or whatever. You also want to use the discussion to explain any discrepancies between what you found and what others have found, right? So it could be, we found this, which shows a positive result, and everybody else has shown negative. And why is that? Well, we had different methods. Maybe we had better methods. Maybe we had different kind of people in our studies that others have. Maybe we looked at it in a different way. So why is yours different? You want to explain that. And then you want to say, why does this information matter and for whom? Like, does it have policy implications? So a lot of the time at the end of some of my articles that we're writing about the criminalization of drugs and how that contributes to the opioid crisis and how it also contributes to HIV risk. And we write about, so like, why is that important and what should we do about it? And sometimes you also want to write about new directions in research. It could be that if you created a new tool, a new technique, or something like that, that you want to say, hey, maybe you want to use that technique too, or this is why it's better, right? You get a more precise result or the like. You want to tell the reader why that is. And as I said a few minutes ago, I'm just going to check my time here. You want to write your abstract. So you've got your intro, your methods, your results, and your discussion. And then you want to write your abstract. And it is perhaps the most important section that you'll write of your whole paper, but you can't write it till you've written all the other sections. As this reference suggests, Andrade, for the vast majority of readers, the paper does not exist beyond its abstract, because when you're searching for literature, you're looking at the abstracts, right? You're often looking at the titles first, but you're looking at the abstract. So you need a good abstract to catch the eye of the reader. They're anywhere between 200 to 350 words, depends on the journal. You look at the author instructions and find out what. You follow those very precisely in terms of the structure of how they want their abstracts. If it goes in with the wrong structure, they'll send it back to you. So this is what I do. I still do it. As I note in the next point, one of my co-authors that I write with hates this approach. I don't care. We still do it. We take the full manuscript, we give it a new name, and then we start cutting out all the stuff that we don't need for the abstract. And we keep cutting it down until we have the abstract. And why do I do that? I think it saves time. The other thing that cutting down your article does into the abstract is it preserves your terms, your phrases, and importantly, your numbers. If you're doing quantitative research, if you start writing from scratch, sometimes you put in the wrong number or you have the wrong decimal point or whatever, right? So if you've condensed it down and you've already checked your numbers, you don't have to check them again. So I really like that approach. I still use it. Some of my colleagues use it now. One of my colleagues hates it because she says it's just like you read the same stuff in the manuscript. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. And apparently so are my readers. I get cited. I had a reviewer recently trash that could very clearly see that we had done that. And they wrote some kind of negative remark in the response that came back in the review. I was like, okay, well, you don't like it, but we're going to keep it, right? Because I think it's really important to be consistent in your terminology, consistent in your numbers, and that's one way to do it. Because you don't want to introduce a new idea in your abstract that isn't in your manuscript, right? So just be careful with that. Keywords are really important. You need to do your homework when selecting your keywords. Look at other similar manuscripts. You can see them on PubMed or whatever, however you're searching, Medline or whatever. You can look for the keywords. That way you can look in the articles that you've actually read to see what some of their keywords are. Sometimes you want to be really strategic and use keywords that are going to get picked up in systematic reviews. Depending on the kind of research that you do. So think carefully about your keywords. They're not just something that you do in 10 seconds at the end of your submission. You want to think about it. Because you want people to be able to find your research, right? And keywords is part of that. You want a good title, and as I said a little while ago, you want a good title, and I think you write this last. I think good titles, and others say the same, are simple and they're accurate. They're the most read aspect of a publication. They're what is screened for a systematic review. You want to balance what's considered generality with specificity. So you don't want to be so specific and so narrow in your title that nobody really knows what it's about except a very small audience, even though you want a broader audience, right? You want it to stand out and attract readers. In qualitative research, we're always trying to go for catchy titles, right? Which are great. But if you force a catchy title, it never quite works. So try and find something that's simple and accurate and it's not boring. That's important for a title, not too boring. When you're writing articles, there's lots of tools available online. Here's one for Prisma if you're writing some kind of review, and it helps you make sure that you've covered all the things that you need to cover in your article. There's all kinds of tools like this that are available from the different publishers that are free. A new thing in the last few years, a lot of the journals now offer, or I should say the publishers offer an editing service. I've never used one. We sort of edit within our group for better or for worse. And there's different kinds of editing available, but it may be relevant to you. Maybe you would benefit from some editing. And there's the price there for scientific editing of, what did I say, a 2,000 word count art manuscript on a budget plan. And it was not the super quick version, but it was the next level of speed. Anyway, it was $1,500. Not cheap, but it made, maybe it's something that you can afford as part of your research group and something that will be of value to you as a writer to improve your writing over time. So things you can do in short periods of time to get your writing going is search for references, but it's in red because it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole. One of my doctoral students just told me that this morning. She's like, I fell down the rabbit hole, Carol. I was reading and I couldn't get out for 2 days because I followed my nose, which is great. But don't do that if you're actually supposed to be writing. You can read some background literature. You can format your manuscript. That counts as writing. But if you're only formatting your manuscript, you're not really writing, right? So, think about that. You consult an expert on a challenging issue. Maybe you have some kind of weird statistical anomaly that you don't really understand. Maybe you need to talk to somebody about it. That counts as part of the writing practice, right? And proofreading and the like. That's what you can do in short periods of time. Maybe you put that in for an hour in your schedule or half an hour. In long periods of time, you can organize and schedule. You need to organize and schedule this time. You can set priorities. You can write a writing to-do list. It's a time when you stay focused. So I don't know if you can see this. No, I don't think I can get my camera, but I have a door. Anyway, that probably wasn't worth the effort of moving my monitor. But anyway, I have a door with a window. And when I'm in my office pre-COVID, if I was actually writing, I'd put my coat over my door. And so people couldn't see if I was in or not. And that's one of the ways I avoid distractions. I'm a terrible library writer. I never, even when I was a student, I never went to the library. I could never focus there. It was too quiet, drove me nuts. But maybe that works for you. And maybe that's the place you need to go, right? I turn the ringer off on my phone. I turn off the chime on my email. That makes me crazy during the day, and it's a sense of distraction. You can tell people to stay away if you want. Like my colleagues, just like, don't bug me. It's Friday. Okay, I understand. When you're done your long writing periods, you want to make notes of what's done and what needs to be done so you can pick it up easily, right? If you think about if you're writing a big manuscript and you spent 8 hours and you don't write any notes, maybe you have to spend 2 hours reading it again to get going again. So you want to leave yourself some notes. One of my colleagues, she was in the office behind me, she used to go on these writing retreats, and I'd be like, what the heck is a writing retreat? And I tried it, and she would go with some friends, and they would write in the morning, and then they'd go to different cities, and they'd go and do fun things in the afternoon. So we tried that, my colleague and I, Adrian Gouda, and the first 2 attempts we failed because we were too busy socializing. And more recently, well, not during COVID, actually, because we haven't been able to retreat that way. We were more successful before COVID. We didn't do anything fancy. He works in Windsor. He'd come to Toronto. I, set up a big room on a different floor of my building, and we'd sit at either ends of the room. We talk to each other for a little bit, and then we'd go and we'd write. And we had goals that we'd set, and that really worked for us. Maybe it'll work for you if you're writing groups, but you want to think about it, and also, keep the socializing down, or you'll fail. You can try a writing method. There's different kinds of writing methods. One of my former doctoral students, who now you probably see her in the news. Her name's Jillian Cola. She writes and talks a lot about the opioid crisis. She told me about this method, the Pomodoro Method, which helped her. I don't know if I should ask her if she still uses it, but it's a timer. And basically you write, you turn the timer on and you write until the timer gongs, and then you're free. And a lot of people find that works quite well. There are writing accountability groups. Some people write in groups. They're not writing about the same thing, but they're saying, some of my colleagues do that here. Every Monday in the morning from 9 until I think it's 11, they meet at 9, they have a little chit chat, and then they all go write. And then the next week when they do that, they have to come back and say, this is what I accomplished, right? Helps keep you going. It helps keep them going. There are also writing accountability sheets. If you Google that, you can find them. It helps you, it really focuses on the minutia. So if you're a person that likes the minutia, those are for you. Not for me, but writing accountability sheets really work well for some people. And there's all kinds of them if you Google them. So as this cartoon suggests, it's a writer's block. You put it on top of your desk and then you can't write there anymore. Well, I talked about removing specious barriers. So if you're stuck in a writing block, go back to the specious barrier slide and think about, how am I going to get over myself, right? To keep moving, because writing is important to my career. So what do? When you think about writer's block, you think about, what is it about me that's impeding my ability to move forward? Don't be gentle. Although, to be honest, in the pandemic, you have to be more gentle than we have in the past. Sometimes you can't write because you've hit a difficult time or a difficult section. Maybe you're more challenged about writing that. You've never written it before. Maybe you just need to power through. Maybe you need to read a little bit more, but as I said, don't go down the rabbit hole and get stuck there. Discuss if you're with your colleague or your supervisor, if you're having problems, and try and get some help to set a goal, right? I say maybe discuss with your supervisor, colleague. I think you have to be careful about who you talk to sometimes when you're stuck in a writing block, that you're going to get the kind of support that you need. And you're not going to have someone who's just going to say, suck it up and move on. Maybe occasionally you need to hear that, but sometimes maybe not. Maybe you need a more nuanced approach to that. And probably some of my colleagues would laugh that I said that, because I'm kind of more of the suck it up and move on kind of a person. But that doesn't work all the time. It doesn't work all the time for me, and doesn't work all the time for my students either. If you're having problems in your life, give yourself a break, right? You're not a machine, you're not a robot. And sometimes you just need a break, and you need to recognize when that's what you need to do, and also when you need to get on from your break and continue on writing, right? So take your break and schedule your next writing section to keep yourself moving forward. If it's a persistent problem like mine, you just accept that writing is a struggle and you push through. Be very kind of Buddhist about it. And because that's just the nature of things. If you want to be a scientist, you have to write. And even if, you struggle with it. So before you submit your journal article, now you've got all your sections and everything, you want to proofread. You want to make sure that you have not plagiarized other people. Be very careful about that. You can ruin your career by plagiarizing inadvertently. And you certainly will ruin your career if you do it on purpose and you get caught. So don't do that. Paraphrase, phrase, and cite as much as possible. Be careful not to self-plagiarize because that gets picked up too and doesn't reflect favorably on you as an author. And review the submission guidelines and follow, very closely, right? So that everything gets uploaded. You might have to give some reviewer names, reviewers that you don't want to review your manuscript, all kinds of things. So you want to follow everything very closely. So trying to get published can feel like running the gauntlet. So I have a question for you. Raise your hand or put in the chat box, whichever you prefer, if you've ever had a journal article rejected. Actually, I can't see your hands. I can only see the chat box. Multiple times. I've been rejected, I don't know how many times. Yes, it's so. If you've never submitted an article and you're about to, remember this. You're going to get rejected. And that's just part of what happens in science, right? Thanks for sharing your pain with us about rejection. So, if I asked, how many people have been rejected twice, a lot of you would say that. And if you've been rejected more than 2 times, well, you're in the club with everybody, because that tells you a couple things. One, that you're writing, and that you're trying, and that's part of what happens. You're going to get rejected. So what happens when you get rejected? Well, you have to expect it and learn to accept it. Lick your wounds, complain to your colleagues, gripe, moan, swear. A colleague and I do that all the time. We say really unpleasant things about our reviewers or the editor if we don't like it, and then we get over ourselves and we read the reviews very carefully. We identify what's usable, what's helpful, what's false. We either revise it if that's what we've been told to do, revise and resubmit, or we revise it and resubmit it somewhere else, right? Don't lose your work. I remember one colleague saying, well, it got rejected, so I moved on. It's like, well, why didn't you use what they told you and, submit it somewhere else? Just because one journal says no doesn't mean another journal won't say yes. Use what they've told you, fix your manuscript. Manuscripts aren't perfect, and resubmit again. You don't necessarily have to submit to a journal that has a lower impact factor. Sometimes you can go higher. Sometimes that works, right? I had one manuscript that it took me five different journals. I was so determined by the end to get that thing in, and I did. It's not my best work, but I got it published. And we had a lot of people who put a lot of effort into that manuscript, and we got it published. And I'm pleased for that. Sometimes you can ask the editor to reconsider, but you can't do that very often. I've asked in my career, twice, I think, maybe 3 times in 20 some odd years as an independent scientist. Twice, actually it was 3. Twice the editor reconsidered, but there was exceptional circumstances. It was one we did everything that the reviewers asked us to do, and then they turned around and said, it doesn't fit the scope of our journal. We're like, what the heck? Of course it does. That's why we submitted it to you. And here's 5 other articles that you've published this was a methods paper that addressed methods. So actually, your journal publishes something on methods. It was much more polite when I wrote the letter, and the editor accepted it, and we got it published. But so maybe you can do that. Not a lot of people do that. It's not kind of the thing to do, but every now and then there's an exception when you're like, no, that was not right. And I'm going to try and see if I can get the editor to reconsider. And really important is to remember to celebrate your successes. So, if you get a journal article accepted, like, go have a coffee, or, go have a drink, or whatever it is, or, go have lunch with your authors and say, hey, look what we did, what we accomplished together. It's really important to celebrate your successes throughout your career. Assorted last tips for you. Discuss authorship in order from the beginning. Complicated, awkward, so essential, really challenging for students. I've had a lot of students come into my office, say to me, I was doing such and such research with such and such, and they left me off the order, they changed the order or whatever. And I'm like, well, did you discuss authorship? No. So you have to find a way to do that. I do that with my teams from the get-go about who's going to be in the author list. I often say, I'm not guaranteeing you your order unless, if you're the student or the research coordinator who's doing the majority of the writing, then you're the first author and I'm the last. But it's important to talk about that because it's so discouraging. I had it happen to me over the years too, when you put a lot of work in and you get forgotten. Well, maybe it's important to ask, right? So you kind of don't get forgotten. Work with colleagues who write and will write with you and also will do reviews. So I told you about my numbers earlier, and a lot of my productivity came after I moved to UT and I started to write with other people. I had worked with different teams who liked to write and put writing as a goal. And so it really improved my productivity. We, in the health field, few of us write alone. And so find teams that like to write and to help push your work out there. As I said, use an approach or method or time that works for you. Make sure you're a good colleague if someone asks you to be part of their journal article. I'm mostly a good colleague. I mostly deliver. Occasionally I don't. And I always feel guilty about that. And but if you're asked to participate, make sure you do. You'll get asked again. Ask trusted mentors and colleagues to review your papers. I say trusted because we live in a competitive world and you want to make sure that you get good feedback from people who are in it for you when they do that work for you. Make use of writing centers, workshops, and editing services. If you're a university student, there's all kinds of those. Look around your university. There's tons of them, and they're free. And you can really improve your writing. And be kind and firm with your colleagues, depending on your stage of career. If you're a master's student, you're not going to tell, like a full professor at another university, hey, dude, your contribution to this manuscript is late. Maybe you're going to get the PI to do that, right? But if you're, the PI, you might say to your colleagues, you're supposed to review this and I'm waiting for it. Maybe you give people a couple of nudges and then you might have to be a little firmer and say, I'm going to take your silence as a lack of interest and we're going to move on. So think about that, but be careful when you do that. So there are lots of resources. I've talked about some of them. You can find them. And I hope this helps you get writing and getting your work out there. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. And I think I thought I was going to be shorter this year, but I think a little over time. So I apologize for that.
No worries on the time. Just thank you very much for the presentation today. It's always so important to consider how to publish scientific articles.
Great. So Charity asked, how do you figure out what's important to write in a short report? Well, there's so many answers to that. A short report, you might pick something that is stands on its own. that you don't need a whole bunch of other findings to hold it together, right? Or it could be something that's exceptionally novel too, right? So, it's like one figure or one table or one analysis, and you don't need a whole lot of other material to explain it. So that might be how you shorten something. You can't do a short report that's usually only descriptive. Just so like, think about that, right? It can't, a short report isn't necessarily simple, it's short. So think about that. How do you recover from writing burnout and maintain Shifa? Well, I think if you're burned out, you need to take a break. And then I think you need to think about what's your practice of writing and how that may have contributed to your burnout. And maybe you need to write with more people. Could be. Maybe you take on too much. Maybe you're writing at a time of day that's not good for you. And but that's really kind of dependent on, because people have complicated lives, right? And maybe you need to think about, maybe you need to write a little bit less, right? Like maybe, getting out 10 manuscripts this year is your goal, but maybe 7 is enough, right? So those are a few things to consider. Good. I think we've exhausted the questions.
It looks like we may have. Oh, one last one. Maybe just a comment coming through.
So Andre, I would suggest trying pushing through it first, right? Just like Jay told me a long time ago, just go sit at your desk, Carol, and write something. So maybe try that. And if that doesn't work after a few days, then try something else. But try to push through first. Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you once again. And I think we will go to a short break right now. But thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Karen.